picture the scene. It's the late 1920s.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And we are sitting in this stuffy, wood-paneled lecture hall at Eastern Illinois State Teachers College. It's in Charleston, Illinois.
You can probably smell the chalk dust.
Oh, absolutely. The chalk dust, the floor wax. And there's this college junior sitting there. He's a genuinely massive guy. He actually plays on the varsity football team.
Right.
And he's squeezed into a desk that is just entirely too small for him. At the front of the room, you've got this professor droning on and on, like just reading straight from the Old English epic poem, Beowulf.
Oh, man. The quintessential mind-numbing collegiate experience right there.
Seriously.
It's the kind of lecture where you can literally feel yourself aging in real time.
Exactly. It's that kind of boredom that almost borders on physical pain.
Yeah.
But suddenly this college junior, he has an epiphany.
Okay.
He realizes with just absolute terrifying clarity that he is completely wasting his life sitting in that chair.
Wow. Just right then and there.
Right then and there. So right in the middle of the lecture, while the professor is mid-sentence, this giant of a student simply stands up.
He doesn't say anything?
Nope. He doesn't pack his bag. He doesn't say, excuse me. He just walks straight down the aisle toward the exit.
I love it.
And the professor, who is clearly offended by this, makes some snide remark to his back.
Yeah.
And in response, and this is the best part, this student grabs the heavy classroom door, walks out, and slams it behind him with every single ounce of his football player's strength.
Oh, my gosh.
He slams it so hard that the thick glass window in the center of the door completely shatters, just bursts into hundreds of pieces, raining down all over the hallway floor.
That is the ultimate literal mic drop. Decades before microphones were even a thing, people dropped, you know?
Right.
He didn't just leave a room. He violently severed his tie to a conventional life path.
And the guy who shattered that glass, that college dropout who just walked away from the expected path to go wander the earth, that was Burl Ives.
It's such a perfect origin story.
It really is. That literal mic drop kicked off an 85-year journey, one that took him from a jail cell in Utah for singing a dirty folk song all the way to the stage of the Academy Awards.
And eventually into the living rooms of basically every single person listening right now.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, we're tracking that journey.
And what is deeply poetic about that opening moment, the Beowulf incident, is the aftermath. Because, get this, 60 years after he shattered that glass and walked out, that very same teacher's college, which is now Eastern Illinois University, they actually named a building after him.
Shut up. Really?
Yeah. The school's most famous, most destructive dropout eventually became its namesake.
That is so good. It perfectly captures the whiplash of his entire existence. And I think for anyone listening who feels stuck in a career right now or, feels like they've backed themselves into a corner, Burl Ives is the absolute blueprint for relentless reinvention. Our mission today is to trace exactly how he navigated these massive transitions in his life, how he took the raw, unpolished tools of his youth and just carried them across all these different mediums.
From live folk singing to the radio.
Right, from the intimate glow of radio to the golden age of Hollywood and finally into immortal pop culture.
And you really can't understand those pivots without looking at where he started.
Yeah.
I mean, his ability to shapeshift later in life comes directly from the dirt under the fingernails reality of his childhood.
So let's paint that picture. June 14th, 1909, he's born in a place called Hunt City, Illinois. And when we say city, we are being very generous here.
Right, it's tiny.
It's an unincorporated community in Jasper County. His parents are Levi, who goes by Frank, and Cordelia, who goes by Deli.
Okay.
Frank is a farmer. Later on, he pivots into contracting work for the county. So this is a very rural, working-class, deeply terrestrial beginning. And Burl is one of 7 kids.
Wow, 7.
Yeah. Audrey, Artie, Clarence, Argola, Lilburn, Norma, and little Burl.
In a household of 7 children in rural 1910s America, you have to find a way to stand out. Or, at the very least, entertain yourself, right? Because the entertainment wasn't coming from a screen.
No, not at all.
It was entirely self-generated.
And that self-generated entertainment actually sparks his first real performance. Completely by accident.
How so?
Well, he's just a little boy out in the garden with his mother, Deli, and they are singing together, not for an audience, just, to pass the time while working the soil. But his uncle happens to be walking by and overhears them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the uncle stops in his tracks. He is so floored by the natural resonance of this little kid's voice that he immediately invites his nephew to sing at the local old soldiers reunion in Hunt City.
Which is a massive cultural event in a town like that. I mean, an old soldiers reunion in the late 1910s or early 1920s meant you had veterans of the Civil War sitting in the audience.
Really? Civil War veterans?
Yeah, it was the absolute social peak of the county.
That's incredible. So he gets up on that makeshift stage, and he belts out a rendition of the traditional folk ballad, Barbara Allen.
Oh, classic.
Right, it's this old, tragic Scottish ballad about unrequited love and death. So to have a young kid singing a song with that much emotional weight and doing it beautifully, it completely wowed the crowd.
I bet.
But looking at these early years, I want to talk about a paradox. Because I really struggled to wrap my head around this when I was looking at the source material.
What's the paradox?
We have this image of him slamming doors and rebelling against the rigid structure of college, right? The ultimate hobo free spirit. But simultaneously, as a young man, he is aggressively seeking out some of the most rigidly structured organizations in the world.
Ah, you're talking about his fraternal affiliations.
Yes.
It is a brilliant contradiction.
It makes no sense to me. Even before 1924, when he's just a young teenager, he becomes a Lone Scout, which was this rural program that eventually folded into the Boy Scouts of America.
Right.
Then, when he gets to high school and college in Charleston, he joins the Order of Demolay, which is a Masonic youth organization. And then, in 1927, the very same year he graduates from Newton High School, he is initiated into Scottish Rite Freemasonry.
Yeah, to a modern listener, joining the Freemasons at 18 might sound like a bizarre, esoteric hobby for a teenage rebel.
That's exactly what I thought.
But we have to place this in the context of 1920s rural America. Fraternal organizations were not just secret handshakes and aprons. They were the ultimate social safety net.
Interesting.
In an era before robust government welfare, before widespread national insurance, these lodges were the fabric that held men together. They provided networking, moral instruction, and this profound sense of ancient community.
So it wasn't about him wanting to wear a cool ring. It was about seeking a foundation.
Precisely. Burl Ives wasn't a pure anarchist. The guy who broke the glads in the Beowulf lecture didn't hate community. He just hated hollow, irrelevant academic posturing.
That makes sense.
Freemasonry, the Scouts, the Demolay, these organizations offered rituals that actually meant something. They offered a lineage. And if you think about it, folk music operates on the exact same psychological level.
Wait, really? How so?
Folk music is a system of belonging. It's a centuries-old ritual passed down from voice to voice, creating this invisible fraternity of the working class. He was drawn to ancient systems of belonging, whether that was a Masonic lodge or a ballad from the Scottish Highlands.
Wow, that totally reframes him for me. He's building his safety net before he jumps. Because he does try to play the conventional game first, right? On July 23, 1929, he actually attempts to enter the formal music industry.
Right, the recording session.
Yeah. He travels to Richmond, Indiana, to a studio run by the Star Piano Company. He's there to make a trial recording for their Gennett label.
And Richmond, Indiana in the 1920s was a bizarrely important hub for early jazz and folk recordings.
Yeah.
I mean, Gina Records recorded early legends like Louis Armstrong and Bix Beiderbecke.
So it's a big deal. He goes into the booth. He's 20 years old. He records a song called Behind the Clouds. But the recording is rejected.
No, okay.
And the studio doesn't just shelve it. A few weeks later, they literally destroy the master. The physical recording is obliterated. Later in his life, Ives didn't even remember the session happening.
The fragility of early media is just heartbreaking. Recording in 1929 was an arduous mechanical process. You were often singing into this massive acoustic horn that physically vibrated a stylus to cut grooves into a wax master.
That sounds intense.
It was. And if the label executives didn't think it was commercially viable instantly, they would just melt the wax down to reuse it.
Yeah.
The raw material was too expensive to preserve failures.
That's brutal. So the door was slammed in his face. The physical evidence of his dream was literally melted down. And I think that rejection, combined with the onset of the Great Depression, pushes him fully into the lifestyle that would define his early mythos.
The hobo years.
The 1930s arrive, and Burl Ives hits the open road. He travels across the United States as an itinerant singer. He is hopping freight trains, earning his meals by doing odd jobs, and just playing his banjo. He becomes the living, breathing archetype of the American hobo.
He is walking into the crucible of the American folk experience. I mean, the 1930s during the Dust Bowl and the Depression was an era of mass, desperate migration. Millions of people were displaced.
Yeah.
So when Ives is riding in a boxcar, he is absorbing the visceral reality of that pain. He's smelling the coal dust. He is feeling the hunger.
It wasn't an act.
Exactly. He isn't sitting in a library reading sheet music about the working man. He is standing in the soup kitchen line next to him, trading songs for a piece of bread.
And sometimes the authorities didn't appreciate a massive, bearded man with a banjo rolling into town. Which brings us to a defining incident in Mona, Utah.
Oh, this is a great story.
He gets arrested. The local police throw him in a jail cell for vagrancy. But the arrest report is what makes this legendary. The authorities were specifically offended because he was singing an English folk song called Foggy Dew, which they deemed a bawdy song.
Which is hilarious from a modern perspective, but very serious in 1930s conservative Utah.
Right. I looked into Foggy Dew. There are a few variations, but the English version he likely sang is essentially a subtle, slightly cheeky ballad about a weaver who ends up in bed with a frightened young woman he's courting, allegedly to protect her from the bugaboo or the foggy dew.
Right, the Foggy Dew.
By today's standards, it's incredibly tame. By Mona, Utah standards, it was a threat to public morality.
The fact that he was jailed for the content of his song is the ultimate badge of honor for a folk singer. I mean, it proved that his music had teeth. It wasn't just background noise. It had the power to disrupt the social order of a town.
Totally. But I want to push back on this romantic image of the wandering, authentic hobo for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because there is a massive detail from this era that seems to contradict the whole simple vagabond narrative. Around 1931, he starts performing on WBOW radio in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Right.
He goes back to school, attending classes at Indiana State Teachers College. And then in 1933, the absolute kicker, he attends the Juilliard School in New York.
Ah, yes. The Juilliard School.
Yeah.
The single most prestigious performing arts conservatory in the United States.
So help me reconcile this. I struggle to put the guy sleeping in a Utah jail cell in the same body as the guy doing vocal warm-ups in a pristine Manhattan conservatory. Was the Vagrant Hobo Act just a calculated brand? Was he faking it?
That is the most crucial question of his early career, and the answer is neither was fake. Both were entirely necessary for what he was about to become.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The vagrant lifestyle gave him his unassailable authenticity. When he sang a hobo song, the audience implicitly trusted him because they knew he had the dirt under his fingernails. He possessed the raw material. But raw material isn't enough to sustain a multi-decade career across different media. Juilliard gave him the mechanics to broadcast that raw material perfectly.
What do you mean by the mechanics?
At Juilliard, he was studying the physical science of his own body. Breath control, diaphragmatic support, pitch-perfect resonance. He was learning how to take the raw emotional pain of a Dust Bowl ballad and project it to the back row of a theater without destroying his vocal cords.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He learned how to manipulate his tone so that a whisper could be heard perfectly. He wasn't abandoning his folk roots at Juilliard. He was sharpening the knives. He was turning his voice into a precision instrument.
So he took the soul of the boxcar and wrapped it in the technique of the opera house.
Beautifully put, yes.
And all of that training, combined with his life experience, converges perfectly in 1940. He launches his own radio show. He titles it The Wayfaring Stranger, taking the name from one of the haunting traditional ballads he loved to sing.
This is the moment the trajectory shifts. Radio in the 1940s was the ultimate cultural catalyst.
It really was. We think of mass media today as so fragmented, but radio back then was a shared national campfire.
Absolutely.
Over the next decade, through this show, Burl Ives almost single-handedly popularizes traditional folk songs for an enormous mass audience. We are talking about songs that had been localized in specific valleys or regions for decades. Suddenly, he is broadcasting Foggy Dew, the very song that got him arrested in Utah, to millions of people without a single cop being able to stop him.
Poetic justice.
He popularizes the Blue Tail Fly, an old minstrel tune that most people know as Jimmy Crackcorn. He brings Big Rock Candy Mountain, the ultimate fantasy song of a starving hobo, straight into middle-class living rooms.
Think about the mechanics of early radio, though. It is a blind medium. It completely strips away the visual. The listener cannot see the performer's facial expressions, their physical size, or their costume. The entire emotional weight of the performance has to travel invisibly through the airwaves and reassemble itself in the listener's mind. It relies purely on the warmth, the storytelling capability, and the subtle emotional finesse of the voice.
And by December 1943, his mastery of this medium is undeniable. He moves to New York City to work for CBS Radio, earning $100 a week, which was a very solid living at the time.
Oh, yeah, great money.
To understand his specific vocal magic, there is a quote from the music critic John Rockwell in our sources that I want to dissect.
Let's do it.
Rockwell described Ives' voice as having, quote, the sheen and finesse of opera without its latter-day Puccinian vulgarities and without the pretensions of operatic ritual. It was genteel in expressive impact without being genteel in social conformity.
He's a dense piece of criticism, for sure, but it unlocks exactly why Ives was so successful.
So let's break it down. The sheen and finesse of opera. That is obviously the Juilliard training doing its job, the breath control, the perfect vibrato. But Rockwell adds, without its latter-day Puccinian vulgarities. What is Rockwell getting at there?
He means that Ives wasn't showing off. In late opera, particularly around Puccini's era, there can be a tendency toward vocal acrobatics. Singers proving how loud they can get or how long they can hold a high note simply for the sake of the spectacle.
Right, it becomes about the singer, not the song.
Exactly. Ives stripped all that ego away. He used operatic-level technique purely to serve the simple emotional core of a folk song. He made world-class vocal control sound entirely effortless.
And then there's the second half of the quote, genteel in expressive impact without being genteel in social conformity. He sounded incredibly polite, warm, and inviting. He sounded like a favorite grandfather sitting in your living room. But the lyrics he was delivering, songs about hobos, rebellious workers, vagrants, these were inherently anti-establishment. He was essentially Trojan horse.
He really was.
He sneaked counterculture sentiments into the mainstream American living room by wrapping them in this velvet, perfectly controlled voice.
And radio was serving as an incubator for his next phase.
Yeah.
When you perform only on a microphone, you develop a profound sense of dramatic timing. You learn exactly how long a pause needs to be to make the listener lean in. You learn how to modulate your volume to create suspense. He was getting a nightly masterclass in acting, solely through audio.
And that audio mastery was about to become physical. The momentum of his radio success was pulling him out of the sound booth and onto the physical stage. This leads us into his early Hollywood and theatrical crossovers. But as with everything in his life, history had a way of interrupting. Before he could fully conquer Hollywood, the world went to war.
Yeah, in early 1942, like millions of other young men, Ives is drafted into the United States Army.
He spends time at Camp Dex in New Jersey and Camp Upton in New York. But the military recognizes that his true value isn't necessarily holding a rifle in a trench. His artistic skills intersect with his service. He joins the cast of Irving Berlin's legendary production, This Is the Army,
which was a massive, touring, morale-boosting military musical. It featured a cast composed entirely of soldiers.
He attains the rank of corporal, and when the production eventually moves to Hollywood to be adapted into a film, he is transferred to the Army Air Forces. Ultimately, he is honorably discharged in September 1943, reportedly for medical reasons. But that military theater experience seems pretty vital.
It was. It kept him performing under incredibly rigorous, disciplined conditions. It kept him in the public eye during a global conflict. He was serving his country by doing exactly what he did best.
So after his discharge, he moves to California, briefly sharing an apartment with the actor Harry Morgan, actually.
Oh, that's a fun fact.
And he begins to make his first real incursions into Hollywood, but he does it in a highly calculated way. In 1946, he's cast in the film Smokey, and his role, a singing cowboy.
The singing cowboy was a wildly popular archetype in the 1930s and 40s. Think Gene Autry or Roy Rogers. It was a staple of Western cinema.
To me, this is a brilliant transition strategy. Playing a singing cowboy isn't a massive stretch from his Wayfaring Stranger radio persona. It's like a modern-day pop star getting a cameo, playing a musician in a feature film.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
It's the safest way to dip a toe into Hollywood acting.
It's a transitional mechanism because film acting is a deeply technical medium. You have to hit specific tape marks on the floor. You have to understand where your key light is. You have to match your actions from take to take for continuity.
It's a lot to juggle.
If he had jumped straight into a heavy Shakespearean dramatic role, the technical demands of the camera might have completely overwhelmed him. But by playing a singing cowboy, he could rely on his world-class singing ability to carry him while he learned the quiet mechanics of a film set. He was getting paid to practice.
And the musical crossovers keep elevating him. In 1949, he introduces the song Lavender Blue in the Disney film So Dear to My Heart. His version becomes a massive hit, and the song itself is nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song.
Wow.
Concurrently, his recording career is hitting new peaks. In 1947, he records a new, energetic version of The Blue Tail Fly. But he doesn't do it alone. He is paired with the absolute titans of 1940s pop music, the Andrews Sisters.
Oh, smart move.
Very smart. He correctly figured their massive mainstream success would help the record sell, and it became a huge Billboard hit.
He is solidifying his mythos on all fronts. In 1948, he publishes his autobiography, and of course he titles it The Wayfaring Stranger.
Naturally. So let's pause and look at where Burl Ives is at the dawn of the 1950s. He is sitting on top of the world. He is a beloved folk singer, a national radio star, a rising Hollywood presence, and a best-selling author. He has successfully woven all the disparate threads of his life into this golden parachute.
It looks like an unbroken upward trajectory. But the foundation of that success, his deep ties to the folk music community, was about to become a massive political liability.
Yeah.
The Cold War was freezing over Hollywood, and Ives was walking right into the crosshairs.
This brings us to the crucible of his life. The blacklist, the bitter betrayals, and the forced pivot to serious acting. To truly understand the stakes of what happens next, we have to rewind slightly and look at the associations he formed during his early folk music days in New York.
Yeah.
Ives was closely associated with a folk singing group called the Almanacs.
The Almanacs were essentially the architects of the mid-century American folk revival. We're talking about legendary figures here: Woody Guthrie, Will Geer, Millard Lampell, and Pete Seeger.
These were the heavyweights. But they weren't just musicians, they were deeply political. The Almanacs were active in a group called the American Peace Mobilization, or the APM.
Right.
Now, we need to carefully explain the political climate here, focusing strictly on the source material. The APM was a far-left group. Initially, in the late 1930s and early 1940s, they were staunchly isolationist.
Meaning they wanted no part of the war.
Exactly. They were strongly opposed to American entry into World War II and fiercely criticized President Franklin Roosevelt's pro-Allied policies. They recorded aggressive pacifist songs with titles like Get Out and Stay Out of War and Franklin, oh, Franklin.
But global politics shifted abruptly, and the APM shifted right along with them. In June 1941, the Axis powers invaded the Soviet Union.
Right.
The moment that happened, the APM abandoned its pacifist stance entirely. They reorganized into the pro-war American People's Mobilization.
Because defending the Soviet Union was now a priority for the far left, and Ives and the Almanacs pivoted right alongside them. They re-recorded several of their songs to reflect this new pro-war stance, suddenly favoring U.S. entry into the conflict. They recorded songs like Dear Mr. President and Reuben James, which was a famous track about a U.S. destroyer sunk by German U-boats before America officially entered the war.
At the time, performing these songs just seemed like topical folk music. But these associations, singing with the Almanacs, working with the APM, and visibly mirroring political stances that aligned with Soviet interests, it created a paper trail.
Yeah.
And that paper trail was a ticking time bomb.
Fast forward to the post-war era, the dawn of the 1950s. The Red Scare is sweeping through the United States. Senator Joseph McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, are aggressively hunting for communist sympathizers in American society, particularly in the media and entertainment industries. In 1950, a pamphlet called Red Channels is published.
Red Channels was essentially a conservative watchdog report. It listed the names of 151 actors, writers, musicians, and broadcast journalists who allegedly had communist ties or sympathies.
And Burl Ives' name was in that pamphlet? Because his name was printed, he was blacklisted.
We really have to make you, the listener, feel the claustrophobia of the Hollywood blacklist. It wasn't just a bad review or a temporary cancellation. It was a total, absolute quarantine.
Yeah, it was devastating.
If you were blacklisted, studios legally and socially could not hire you. Radio networks wouldn't let you near a microphone. Record labels dropped you. You were economically radioactive. Your entire livelihood just vanished overnight.
Faced with the absolute destruction of everything he had built since he shattered that glass window in college, Ives is backed into a corner. 2 years pass. The pressure is immense. And in 1952, he makes a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life.
He agrees to cooperate.
He agrees to cooperate with HUAC. He sits before the government committee and he testifies.
And our sources state explicitly that he did this out of fear of losing his source of income. He was terrified of losing the career he had fought so incredibly hard to build.
And his testimony did exactly what he needed it to do. It acted like a controlled burn in a forest fire. By naming names, by identifying fellow artists who had been involved in those left-wing circles, He proved his loyalty to the committee.
Wow.
The committee cleared him, the blacklist was lifted, and he was allowed to return to acting and singing. But the cost was catastrophic. He saved his career by feeding his friends to the fire.
The fallout was immediate and brutal. It caused a massive, bitter rift between Ives and the folk music community that had been his home, his source of material, and his identity for decades.
Pete Seeger, who was essentially the moral center of the folk revival, was furious. Seeger accused Ives of the ultimate betrayal, naming names and sacrificing cultural freedom just to save his Hollywood paycheck. Seeger publicly and fiercely ridiculed Ives for trying to distance himself from the very organizations and working-class ideals he had built his entire Wayfaring Stranger persona upon.
It is the ultimate moral crucible. You have to hold two opposing truths in your head when looking at this. On one hand, you have a man desperately protecting his art and his survival against an oppressive, tyrannical government committee.
Right.
On the other hand, his survival directly contributed to the ruin of his peers. Seeger and many others spent years in the wilderness unable to work because men like Ives gave the committee what it wanted.
It's just devastating. Imagine the psychological friction. Here is the man who built his fame singing the songs of the marginalized, the poor, the rebels, and now he's sitting in a suit whispering names to government investigators to protect a studio contract. The folk clubs in Greenwich Village were permanently closed to him. His musical home was gone.
Gone overnight.
So how does an artist process that level of isolation? How does this massive loss alter his output?
It fundamentally forced a pivot. It changed his creative DNA.
Yeah.
Because his testimony alienated him so thoroughly from the folk revival movement, he could no longer rely on his identity as the smiling, benevolent folk hero. The bridge back to his past was burned to ash.
There was no going back.
Exactly. This isolation, this absolute severing of his roots, pushed him to fully commit to the one avenue he had just sacrificed his friends to keep open. Dramatic acting.
He had to prove it was worth it.
He had to become undeniable on screen. If he was going to survive the fallout, he couldn't just be the guy strumming a banjo and a cowboy hat anymore. He had to become a heavyweight.
And interestingly, while he was dealing with the immediate toxic fallout in America, he was finding safe harbor internationally. During the worst of the blacklist pressure, he frequently traveled to the UK. He played on BBC Radio's Children's Hour, singing favorites like Big Rock Candy Mountain and Lavender Blue.
The contrast is mind-boggling. In America, he's at the center of a vicious, life-destroying political witch hunt. In the UK, he is gently singing whimsical folk songs to British toddlers over the radio.
It's absurd. He also performs at the Royal Coronation Festival in 1952 in London. And there's this incredible historical footnote about that. Purportedly, sitting in the audience at that Coronation Festival watching Burl Ives perform were two young boys named John Lennon and Paul McCartney.
Wait, seriously? That is amazing. The cultural cross-pollination of the 20th century never fails to amaze.
I know. But eventually he returns to America. He has to face the music, or rather, the lack of it. Cut off from his musical roots, Ives attacks his acting career with a new, dark intensity. And against all odds, fueled by the complex trauma of the previous few years, he succeeds spectacularly.
This is the era where the entertainer truly transforms into an artist.
We move into the mid-1950s. The singing cowboy is dead. Ives starts taking on massive, serious, dramatically heavy roles. In 1955, he plays Sam, the sheriff of Salinas, in the classic James Dean film East of Eden.
Oh, great movie.
He takes on dense, challenging roles in Desire, Under the Elms, Wind Across the Everglades, and the adaptation of Graham Greene's Our Man in Havana.
These are complicated, morally gray characters. These are not light, fluffy musicals.
But his defining role, the one that etches his name into the history of American theater, starts on Broadway in 1955. He is cast as Big Daddy Pollitt in Tennessee Williams' masterpiece, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Yes, iconic.
He dominates the Broadway stage in that role from 1955 to 1956, and his performance is so monumental that he is brought to Hollywood to reprise the role for the legendary 1958 film adaptation, starring opposite Paul Newman and Elizabeth Taylor.
Big Daddy Pollitt is a towering achievement. He is one of the most imposing, terrifying, vulgar, and emotionally complex patriarchs in all of modern theater. He is a dying, wealthy Southern plantation owner trying to control his fractured family.
And this is where I need you to explain the mechanics of this transformation, because the contrast is unbelievable. How does the gentle radio singer, the guy who made a living softly crooning about the blue-tailed fly, physically and emotionally pull off the domineering, menacing gravity required to play Big Daddy?
If you look closely in his history, the raw materials were always there. He just had to recalibrate them. First, physically, he was an enormous man. He was a former college football lineman.
Right from the Beowulf lecture.
Exactly. When he stood up and commanded a room, he cast a massive shadow. But more importantly, let's go back to Juilliard. He had immense, rigorously trained vocal control. He knew exactly how to support his diaphragm to project a booming, terrifying roar that could shake the back walls of a theater just as easily as he could whisper a lullaby. He used his breath control not to sing, but to weaponize Tennessee Williams's dialogue.
Wow, and you have to wonder how much the Blacklist played into that performance.
Oh, it is impossible to separate the two. Think about the well of emotion he was drawing from. The itinerant struggles of the 1930s, the brutal trauma of the HUAC testimony, the loss of his closest friends, the public vilification from Pete Seeger.
That's a lot of baggage.
All of that pain, guilt, and survival instinct lent a gravelly, hard-earned, terrifying authenticity to Big Daddy. He wasn't a singer pretending to be an angry patriarch. He was an actor tapping into a deep, very real well of psychological survival. He commanded the screen because he had sacrificed a piece of his soul just to be allowed on it.
Man. And that command reached its absolute cinematic peak the very same year, in 1958. He stars as Rufus Hanassi in the sweeping Western epic The Big Country.
Rufus Hanassi is another imposing, unforgettable, violently stubborn patriarch locked in a feud over water rights.
And for that performance, Burl Ives, the college dropout, the former hobo thrown in a Utah jail for a body song, the man who nearly lost his career to the Red Scare, wins the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor.
It is the ultimate validation. He proved that his pivot wasn't just a desperate escape, it was a transition into mastery.
He follows up the Oscar win the next year by starring in a bleak, claustrophobic film noir called Day of the Outlaw in 1959. He had completely rewritten his narrative. He had conquered the folk world, mastered the intimacy of radio, survived the political blacklist, and reached the absolute undeniable pinnacle of Hollywood acting. You would think, at this point, entering his 50s with an Oscar on his mantle, he would just coast.
Most people would. The legacy was completely secure.
But Burl Ives wasn't done shapeshifting. Not even close. In the 1960s, he would initiate one final massive transition. He would synthesize all of his past lives, the gentle singer, the booming actor, the intimate storyteller, into an enduring pop culture legacy that would outlast almost everything else he ever did.
This is the era where he ascends from being a famous actor to becoming a ubiquitous, immortal cultural fixture.
Let's look at how he did it, starting with his return to music. In the early 1960s, he pivots genres. He leaves the pure folk behind and transitions into country music. He moves to recording in Nashville for Decca Records, and he starts working with a producer named Owen Bradley.
Owen Bradley is a titan of the music industry. Along with Chet Atkins, Bradley essentially invented what became known as the Nashville sound.
What exactly made the Nashville sound different from what Ives was doing before?
Traditional folk and early country music were raw. It was fiddles, acoustic guitars, and twang. It was porch music.
Right.
Owen Bradley realized that to sell country music to a massive, urban mainstream pop audience, you had to smooth out those rough edges. The Nashville sound replaced the fiddles with lush, sweeping string sections. They added smooth background vocal choirs. It was polished, sophisticated, and highly produced.
And that sophisticated sound was the perfect vehicle for Ives's Juilliard-trained voice. Bradley used the famous Nashville A-team of session musicians, including the pristine harmonies of the Anita Kerr singers, to back Ives up. The results were immediate.
Oh, huge hits.
Massive. In 1962, he releases a string of crossover hits. A Little Bitty Tear, Call Me Mr. In-Between, and Funny Way of Laughing. These songs didn't just top the country charts. They crossed over and conquered the mainstream pop charts.
He had taken his operatic folk voice and successfully mapped it onto the most commercial sound of the decade.
But the most enduring collaboration between Burl Ives and the Nashville recording apparatus wasn't for a standard album. It was a recording session for a television special. And this is where the legend is truly cemented.
The creation of a holiday immortal.
In 1964, the Rankin Bass production company is putting together a family special for NBC called Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Rankin Bass utilized a specific type of stop-motion animation called animagic. It was a painstaking frame-by-frame mechanical process using small dolls with wire armatures. It has a very distinct, slightly jerky, but incredibly warm and charming visual style.
But the visual style needed a voice to ground it. They hire Burl Ives to voice a character specifically designed for him. Sam the Snowman.
I love Sam the Snowman.
Everyone does. Sam is a banjo-playing snowman wearing a plaid vest who serves as the on-screen host and the narrator of the entire story.
It is the absolute perfect synthesis of his entire career.
Think about it. Sam the Snowman directly addresses the camera, explaining how Rudolph uses his nonconformity to save Christmas from a blizzard. Ives uses the intimate fireside storytelling timing he perfected on the Wayfaring Stranger radio show.
Right.
He uses the warm, avuncular folk persona he built in the 30s. He uses the theatrical enunciation he perfected on Broadway so that every child can understand every word. He sings the soundtrack, composed by Johnny Marks. He sings the title track. He sings Silver and Gold. And of course, he sings A Holly Jolly Christmas.
And those specific recordings transcended television. They became structural pillars of the American holiday season.
To understand the sheer permanence of what he recorded in that booth, look at the Billboard data. A Holly Jolly Christmas made the Billboard year-end chart in 2022.
That is insane.
That is 27 years after Burl Ives died. That is almost 60 years after he recorded it. It still charts annually on the Billboard Holiday Top 100 into the 2020s. Every December, his voice returns to every mall, every radio station, and every living room in the country.
It is a level of cultural immortality that Oscar winners and chart-topping pop stars dream of, but very few ever actually achieve. He became the voice of December.
But his ubiquitous presence in the 60s and 70s wasn't limited to Christmas. He was everywhere on television, and his resume is wildly, wonderfully eclectic. He stars in Disney's live-action film Summer Magic with Hayley Mills. He plays a literal genie in a bottle in the 1964 movie The Brass Bottle alongside Tony Randall.
Which is so funny.
Why would an Academy Award-winning dramatic actor take a role as a genie?
Because he had completely liberated himself from being boxed into a single genre. He realized that his presence, his physical size, and his booming voice was a tool that could be applied to any tone, from high drama to slapstick comedy.
He stars in a short-lived 1965 comedy series called OK Crackerby, playing the presumed richest man in the world. He pivots back to drama, playing Walter Nichols, a senior attorney in the hit series The Bold Ones, The Lawyers from 1969 to 1972.
But then he takes these incredibly bizarre dark turns.
Yes. He does macabre, spooky television. In 1970, he stars in a TV movie called The Man Who Wanted to Live Forever. And his character is a man who operates an isolated mountain facility where he tries to harvest human organs from unwilling donors to extend his own life.
Which is deeply unsettling. Sam the Snowman is harvesting organs.
Exactly. He uses that warm, grandfatherly voice to be absolutely terrifying. In 1972, he guest stars in an episode of Rod Serling's Night Gallery called The Other Way Out, playing a man seeking a highly gruesome psychological revenge for a murder.
Wow.
And let's not forget his legendary 1976 guest appearance on Little House on the Prairie. In Season 3, Episode 10, he plays an old, blind fur trapper who is terrified to leave his cabin, but ends up using his knowledge of the woods to help Laura Ingalls rescue her severely injured father.
He took the massive theatrical gravity he used on Broadway and learned how to compress it for the small, intimate box of a 1970s television set.
He was completely fearless in his later career. He was also everywhere in commercial and civic life. He spent the 70s and 80s as the commercial spokesman for Louisiana Tea. He became the face of the U.S. Bureau of Land Management's This Land is Your Land, Keep It Clean campaign, appearing alongside the fictional spokesman Johnny Horizon.
Which is a beautiful callback to his vagabond days. The hobo who used to sleep in the dirt was now the national spokesman for keeping the American landscape pristine.
He even narrated the 1971 NFL season highlight film for the Washington Redskins. His voice was so iconic that Disney hired him to be the main voice host, playing an audio animatronic named Sam Eagle for the America Sings attraction that opened at Disneyland in 1974.
When you look at this entire sprawling synthesis, it all clicks together perfectly. Every skill he picked up, every persona he inhabited, he kept in his toolbox.
And his later life brought a wave of major honors that reflected all these different facets. In 1966, the Boy Scouts of America, the organization he joined as a young Lone Scout, inducted him and awarded him their highest honor, the Silver Buffalo Award. His home state of Illinois awarded him the Order of Lincoln in 1976, their absolute highest honor in the performing arts.
And he remained deeply dedicated to the organizations that gave him a foundation early on. In 1987, 60 years after he was first initiated into Freemasonry as an 18-year-old, he was elevated to the 33rd and highest degree of the Scottish Rite and later elected the Grand Cross. He was also inducted into the Demolay International Hall of Fame in 1994.
Looking briefly at his personal life, he was married twice. First, in 1945, to a scriptwriter named Helen Peck Ehrlich. They had a son, Alexander, in 1949. They eventually divorced in 1971, and shortly after, he married Dorothy Coaster Paul. Over his later years, they lived a wonderfully varied life. They had a waterfront home in Anacortes, Washington, a place in Galisteo, New Mexico, and in the 60s, he even had a home on a remote barrier island in the Bahamas. Right. He remained a wayfaring stranger to the very end, just traveling a bit more comfortably.
But there is one final vital moment in his later life that brings his entire journey full circle.
The reconciliation.
Yes. For decades, the wound from the HUAC testimony remained open. The folk community had moved on, but the betrayal was a historical scar. However, time and age have a way of softening rigid lines.
In 1993, there was a benefit concert in New York City. Burl Ives, who was 84 years old and using a wheelchair, came out on stage. And joining him on that stage was Pete Seeger.
That must have been something to see.
They had actually managed to reconcile privately years earlier, but this was their public moment. Together, the two men who had been violently torn apart by the geopolitical paranoia of the 1950s, the man who named names and the man who was blacklisted, sat together and sang The Blue Tail Fly.
It is a profoundly moving resolution. It brought closure to the deepest, most agonizing crucible of his life. After all the reinventions, the Oscar win, the Nashville hits, the Christmas immortality, his story was allowed to end on a note of genuine harmony with his original community. The Wayfaring Stranger was finally welcomed back home.
Burl Ives had officially retired from show business on his 80th birthday in 1989. In the summer of 1994, the longtime pipe and cigar smoker was diagnosed with oral cancer. After undergoing several operations, he made the decision to refuse further surgery. He passed away on April 14, 1995, at his home in Washington at the age of 85. He was brought back to where his journey began, buried at Mound Cemetery in Hunt City Township, Illinois.
From singing in a Jasper County garden to broadcasting to millions to shaping the golden age of cinema and back to the soil of Illinois.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener. We spent this time charting one of the most chaotic, multifaceted careers in entertainment history. When you are facing a massive pivot in your own life, whether that pivot is forced upon you by an economic shift, a personal crisis, or a choice you make to walk out of a situation that is draining your soul, remember the mechanics of Burl Ives.
Absolutely.
He didn't just change jobs. He didn't erase his past. He took the tools he gathered, his unmatched Juilliard vocal control, his deep hobo knack for storytelling, his ruthless resilience, and he adapted them to the medium of the moment. He survived by refusing to be defined by a single title.
He proved that a life isn't a single straight rail line. It is a series of interconnected jumps.
We are so often conditioned to think we must pick a path and stubbornly stay on it. But consider the alternative history. If Burl Ives had never stormed out of that Beowulf lecture, if he had just sat there, been a good student, and finished his teaching degree, or if the brutal, claustrophobic pressures of the Cold War hadn't forced him to completely abandon his folk persona and reinvent himself as a serious dramatic actor, would he have ever held that Oscar? Would he have ever become the voice of our holidays?
The friction, the rejection, and the forced transitions are what created the art.
So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. What shattered window in your own life? What bridge you had to burn? What door you angrily slammed? What sudden, chaotic break from your expected path might actually be the exact starting point of your greatest reinvention?
Sometimes the broken pieces of glass on the floor are just pointing the way to a new open road.
A perfect thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the legacy of the ultimate wayfaring stranger, Burl Ives. Keep looking for those open roads.